Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Allison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide. Hi, Alice and I are glad you've joined us for this episode of the podcast. After the last couple of episodes, we felt like we needed a very nuts and bolts topic. So we've decided to go with the topic of biting. And much like Allison was our resident expert about potty training, she is also sort of our resident expert about what to do when children are biting. Because you teach that age group where it's actually fairly typical, right?
It is typical. So it's usually happens around the toddler age, the 18 months to 3, and I teach 2s. So, but that also coincides with the age that they are trying to communicate their wants and needs and their frustrations and angers, and they don't have the words yet to do that. So their instinct might be, hey, let me bite this person. That'll get them knowing that I'm pretty mad about this or whatever it is. And it gets a reaction and it gets them what they want. That's typically what I see is a child gets angry because somebody else may have stolen a toy. They don't have the words to say, hey, it's my turn. I was using that. They don't have those words yet. So they go to the biting, which then gets the reaction of, well, that person's going to drop the toy and I'm going to get what I want. But we really need to teach them this is not the way to get what you want, so you need to kind of replace it with modeling the words that they need to learn how to use eventually, which they might not have the ability to say right now, but they will eventually. So modeling it is what you would need to do. You have to replace this so their instinct isn't to always go for that.
Right, because you can't erase a behavior, you have to replace it.
Right.
And that's true of all children's behavior. Behavior gets replaced rather than erased. So a child is biting. They bite for a variety of reasons. And we Allison and I actually were making a list to prepare for this episode of why children might bite. And they include things like they're exploring their world using their mouths, which is part of their sensory system. They might be teething. They might need oral stimulation. They might not have another way to cope with uncomfortable feelings. They actually might have some sort of other gum irritation. When your gums are irritated and you want to kind of gnaw on something?
Yeah.
And they might not have another way to express their frustration. So there are a variety of reasons why children tend to bite. And I think that how often, not always, but often, how long they continue to exhibit that behavior has to do with the reactions of the adults around them.
Right.
And I just, before Allison kind of takes over and talks about approaches that she has used or what she tells families, I just want to put this out there, and that's this. It is not good policy for you to teach a child how hurtful a bite is by biting them.
Oh, yes. I've had parents say that to me. Oh, I just bit him back, so then they'll know how it hurts. But that really does not teach them anything. That just...
I also don't understand that. I mean, a child hits another child over the head with a block. You aren't going to pick up a block and hit them with it to show them.
Right.
Because that's wrong.
To me, it's showing them that biting is okay.
Right.
Oh, well, my mommy and daddy did it, so now it's okay. What I mean?
It doesn't make sense. You wouldn't do that with any other behavior.
Right.
You wouldn't go and imitate it for any other behavior. And I think the fact that adults tend to default to, well, I'm going to bite her back, just shows how frustrated we are with not knowing what to do when the children are biting.
Right.
So why don't you go ahead and give them some really good advice, Allison, about what to do when the children are biting?
I think a lot of parents think like, oh, my child is biting and this is like an abnormal kind of thing. And I have to say it is not necessarily abnormal. It's just not acceptable. I've worked with several children that go through like a biting kind of phase. So your child's not the only one that has done this. And I think, but when they're in it, I think the parents think like, oh, it's just my child who does it. And it's not. So I think you just need to realize that like, this is kind of a developmental thing and they'll get through it, but they'll only get through it if you really work with them to get through it. So, because I've seen children who they then realize that it works and then they keep doing it for a long time. So you really need to replace that behavior, like we were saying before. I would model all the communication skills. Like when I have a child in my class that I know when he gets frustrated or is in a biting phase because he's uncomfortable or whatever it is, I usually stay with that child throughout the day. And I model, this is how you appropriately play. This is how you appropriately ask for a toy. This is when you are mad or angry. Here are the words I'm going to use. I want that. This is my toy. I don't like it when you do that. Whatever it is, give them the words so that they eventually, when they can talk and use the words, they will use the words.
Yeah, but if they're not, okay, so suppose you have a child who's still not talking, still is pre-verbal or nonverbal.
Yeah.
And so they're not going to be using words. Then what do you tell the families to do?
That, usually I will, that's hard.
It is.
That's really hard. Yeah, because usually by the time I get them, they are a little bit verbal.
I think it's pre or nonverbal, they need to be given something else to do with that energy.
You need to redirect them to an activity that is appropriate,
I actually would rather have a child kind of stamp his feet and hit the table than bite another child.
Right. I've given, like, even if you want to hit this pillow, then hit this pillow.
Or give them something they can bite sometimes.
Give them something they can, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And teach them, biting is for this or biting is for food. I read a study one time that said that for some reason biting into an apple gives people the same satisfaction as biting into a person.
Really?
Yeah. I'm not sure why, but I did read that.
Why either. But maybe if the biting is really for like the reasons we gave before, it's not about frustration. It might just be about oral stimulation. It might just be about, hey, I'm comfortable. Hey, I'm just wanting to explore. Babies, they explore through their mouths.
They do.
And
they have to. And they have to. It's part of their sensory development.
Yeah. If it's just one of those reasons, then biting an apple would give them the exact same satisfaction as biting a person. Yeah, I mean, if it's really, then you're really only, and then you can just eliminate that over time. Eventually they're not going to.
I think you want to be careful how much attention you give to biting when they're really, really young.
Yeah, I usually will give the child who bit more attention, or who got bit more attention than the one who bit the person. Yeah. Because then if they're doing it for the behavior, like the attention, then they realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm not getting attention from this. The other person's getting all the attention, and that was not my goal. My goal was to get all this attention right now. So then it shows them like, oh, but if I do...
Right, I'll get more of your attention if I do something else.
If I do something else. Or and then usually when the child is biting, I will give them a lot of attention for all the other stuff that they're doing. Hey, you're really sharing really nicely. Oh, you're sitting in your chair so nicely. Like anything. Because then they're like, well, wait, I'm getting a lot of attention for doing really awesome things. And they realize, like, I don't have to get this attention from doing that, so I'm going to stop. And they realize their tactic isn't working, so they'll change.
Right. And I think we do have to reinforce with them that biting is not okay. That's not an okay way to approach people.
Right.
That it hurts people. And like you say, once they're verbal, we need to teach them other skills in other ways. And I would prefer even a barely verbal child, like when you feel that frustrated, just yell no and stamp your feet. I would prefer that over the biting.
Right.
And then you can replace that behavior later.
Right.
And I know a lot of places that are giving children who need the oral stimulation, giving them things. They have like these biting necklaces now.
Oh, yeah. I've heard this because there's a child in my school that's using a biting necklace right now, but it's more for another reason, but he has one. And they have these, and you can even buy them for babies, but these are different ones. They're made for that specific reason. And I was like, wow, that's pretty cool and different. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I think
that's like a different way to approach it. But I mean, at least that you're giving them an appropriate thing to bite, like we were saying, replacing it with apples. That would kind of, and then you can eliminate eventually that necklace.
and don't you
You know.
think that the key to it all, I mean, I think this, but you deal with this more than me. I think, is that the dog? The noise that
It's
I
a
heard?
dog.
Oh my
He's,
gosh.
we have an episode about biting, and he is trying to bite my hand this whole
Oh
time.
my
So I feel like
gosh.
I'm not even like really in my right mind right now.
Okay, sorry. So
I'm
let me
sorry
take
if
it.
I'm like
Ready?
a
Here's
little out
here's
of
what I was
it.
going to say. I think that the key to addressing the issue of biting is trying to figure out why is the child biting.
Yes.
And I think that really is the key, because if it is oral stimulation, you can give them other things to bite. If it
Right.
is frustration, we need to teach them other ways to deal with that. If it's teething, then that needs to be dealt with differently than if
Right.
they were expressing frustration. A lot of times when a child is biting, like, I'll tell the families to please go have their mouth checked. Maybe there's something going on with the gums or something.
Yeah. I
I think
usually say
we
go
need to
visit a
figure it
dentist.
out.
Yeah, go see if there's something wrong there in the mouth, like maybe a tooth is coming in, but it's not coming in right. Maybe the gums are inflamed for some reason.
Right.
Go see a dentist or a doctor.
Like,
Usually that's my first thing.
I think figure it out is the first thing.
Figure it out.
And I think when all else fails, what people need to do is seek the expertise of people who understand child development, social workers, therapists, people who specialize in very young children. Seek the expertise that you need, because I think biting is a tough thing to combat.
It is. It is hard.
Right? It's hard to
Yeah.
teach them another way. I mean, your mouth is right there and it's so easy to use it.
Oh, it's so easy. It's so easy, and it gets the job done, to be honest.
It gets the job
You
done,
know?
and it gets
Yeah.
loads and loads of adult attention on you.
Attention. Yep.
So I think that we do need to kind of combat it by first knowing why and then seeking the advice. I know that when you Google this, just like many topics, there's a lot of information on the internet about what to do about biting. And I would just ask that anyone who Googles it, make sure they're looking at something from a reputable organization. It could be from, like, let's say the American Academy of Pediatrics.
Pediatric. Yeah.
It could be from the National Association for the Education of Young Children. It could be from 0 to 3, which is an organization that particularly does research about children between those ages, 0 to 3. You can look for organizations that are very reputable in the field to find what's probably the best advice versus just anybody who can go on the internet and post anything that they think worked for them.
Right. You want to find a respectable, reputable site, not like just a blog or something,
you know? And more than anything, I think Allison and I want you to know that we know that it's tough, and we know that it could take multiple different types of strategies to figure out what works. And most kids grow and develop and stop doing that.
Yeah.
So just keep that in perspective. That eventually tends to resolve on its own.
Yeah.
It's just, I know, hard socially for people. So just know that, if you're looking around at other children and thinking, why is my child biting and these children aren't biting? You can pretty much bet they're doing something else that needs to be addressed, because children need to learn all these skills, and they just exhibit it in different ways. And as one last point before we sign off, I'd like to say this. Please resist labeling children by their behavior. Please resist calling a child a biter.
Right.
This is a child, not a biter.
There's a person in there. Yeah.
Right.
Like, this
is a child who's feeling something that they're having trouble dealing with or figuring out what to do with. This is a child who has a tendency to bite, not a biter.
Right.
So I hope you'll keep that in mind, as frustrating and as mysterious as biting issues can be. We wouldn't be talking about it on a podcast like this if it wasn't fairly common. So I hope that gives you some comfort to know that. If you would like us to help you find other expert information about this, please contact us. My email is Cindy, CINDY, @helpingkidsachieve.com. Allison, tell them how to reach you.
My email is AllisonJoy79@gmail.com.
And we hope that you will email us if you need references to good sources of information. Please avoid going onto social media and just randomly crowdsourcing things. We know how to find the real information for you. Catch you next time. Hello, wonderful podcast listeners. This is Cindy. Allison and I revealed really big news on our recent live episode. We now have a website dedicated to this podcast. Go to howpreschoolteachersdoit.com to read stuff we've written, to check out the latest news, see the topics for upcoming episodes, and to contact us. We'd love to hear from you.